In July 1099, after years of marching, hunger, and siege, an army of Crusaders finally breached the walls of Jerusalem. For weeks they had surrounded the sacred city, exhausted and desperate beneath the summer heat of the Levant. When the defenses finally collapsed, thousands of armed pilgrims surged through the gates of a place revered by Christians, Muslims, and Jews alike. What followed would echo through centuries of memory, shaping relations between religions, kingdoms, and empires long after the Crusaders themselves were gone. The events that culminated in the capture of Jerusalem were part of a much larger movement that began several years earlier in Europe. In November 1095, Pope Urban II addressed a gathering of clergy and nobles at the Council of Clermont in France. His message was both spiritual and political. He called on the warriors of Western Christendom to travel east and aid the Byzantine Empire, which had been losing territory to Turkish forces. At the same time, he framed the expedition as a sacred undertaking, a pilgrimage combined with warfare, promising spiritual reward to those who took part. The appeal resonated deeply across medieval Europe. Thousands of nobles, knights, and ordinary people began preparing for a journey unlike any they had known. Some were motivated by faith, believing they were fulfilling a religious duty. Others were drawn by opportunity, hoping for land, prestige, or redemption from past sins. Within months, groups began forming across France, the German lands, Italy, and beyond. The movement quickly grew larger and more chaotic than its organizers expected. Before the main armies even departed, loosely organized groups of pilgrims and fighters began moving east in what later historians would call the People's Crusade. Many lacked supplies, training, or discipline. Their journey across Europe revealed the volatile mix of religious fervor and social tension that surrounded the crusading movement. In several regions along the Rhine, violence erupted against Jewish communities, leaving a lasting mark on European history even before the Crusade reached the eastern Mediterranean. By 1096, the principal crusading armies had begun their long march toward the Byzantine capital of Constantinople. They traveled in separate contingents led by powerful nobles, including Raymond of Toulouse, Godfrey of Bouillon, Bohemond of Taranto, and others. Though united by a shared religious mission, these leaders represented different regions and ambitions. Coordination among them was often uneasy. The Byzantine Emperor Alexios I Komnenos watched their arrival with caution. While he had requested military assistance against Turkish forces, the scale and independence of the Crusader armies created new uncertainties. Nevertheless, agreements were reached. Crusader leaders swore oaths promising to return former Byzantine territories if they were recaptured. In exchange, the emperor provided guidance, supplies, and transport across the Bosporus into Anatolia. The early stages of the campaign brought significant challenges. Much of Anatolia had come under the control of the Seljuk Turks following their victory over Byzantine forces decades earlier. The Crusaders faced unfamiliar terrain, limited supplies, and a skilled opponent accustomed to mobile warfare. Their first major success came in 1097 at the Siege of Nicaea, an important city near the Byzantine frontier. With assistance from Byzantine forces, the Crusaders surrounded the city and eventually forced its surrender. Yet even this victory revealed tensions between the Crusaders and their Byzantine allies. The city was quietly handed over to imperial authorities, preventing the Crusaders from claiming it themselves. The army continued deeper into Anatolia, where they encountered Seljuk forces near Dorylaeum. The battle that followed tested the resilience of the Crusader coalition. After an intense struggle, reinforcements arrived and the Crusaders secured a difficult victory. It demonstrated that, despite internal rivalries, the various contingents could still fight effectively together. The journey across Anatolia, however, was grueling. Heat, thirst, and hunger took a heavy toll. Many animals died, reducing the army's mobility and supply capacity. Yet the Crusaders pressed forward, eventually reaching the more fertile regions of northern Syria. One of the most significant and difficult episodes of the Crusade unfolded at the city of Antioch. Beginning in late 1097, the Crusaders laid siege to this heavily fortified city, which controlled a crucial route into the Levant. The siege lasted many months, stretching the resources and patience of the army. Starvation became a constant threat. In June 1098, the Crusaders finally gained entry into Antioch through a covert arrangement with a guard inside the walls. But their success quickly turned into a new crisis. Soon after they captured the city, a large Muslim army arrived and surrounded them. The former attackers now found themselves trapped inside the same fortifications they had struggled to conquer. After weeks of hardship, the Crusaders launched a desperate attack against the besieging forces. Against considerable odds, they succeeded in breaking the encirclement. The victory preserved the expedition but deepened rivalries among its leaders. Some sought to establish their own principalities rather than continue toward Jerusalem. Nearly a year passed before the Crusader armies resumed their southward advance. By early 1099, the remaining forces moved along the eastern Mediterranean coast toward their ultimate objective. Jerusalem had enormous symbolic significance. For Christian pilgrims, it was the city associated with the life and death of Jesus. Yet by the late 11th century it was under the control of the Fatimid Caliphate, based in Egypt. When the Crusaders approached the city in June 1099, they faced formidable defenses. Jerusalem's walls, strengthened over centuries, protected a densely built urban center. The Crusader army itself had been reduced by years of campaigning. Supplies were scarce, and the summer climate added to the strain. The initial siege efforts made little progress. Without sufficient siege equipment, the attackers struggled to breach the walls. Efforts to storm the defenses directly were repelled. Meanwhile, the defenders worked to strengthen their positions and secure water supplies within the city. Recognizing the need for new tactics, the Crusaders began constructing siege towers and other engines. Timber was gathered from nearby areas, and labor continued under intense heat. The process required coordination among different contingents that had often disagreed in the past. By mid-July, the preparations were complete. On July 14th and 15th, the Crusaders launched a major assault. Siege towers were pushed toward the walls while archers and infantry provided covering support. Fighting took place along multiple sections of the fortifications. Eventually, one of the towers reached a vulnerable point near the northern wall. Crusader soldiers were able to cross onto the battlements and open the way for others to follow. Once a foothold was established, the defenders were gradually pushed back. As the city's defenses collapsed, large numbers of Crusaders entered Jerusalem. Medieval accounts from both Christian and Muslim sources describe widespread violence during the aftermath of the capture. Such outcomes were not uncommon in medieval warfare when fortified cities fell after prolonged resistance. Many inhabitants sought refuge in religious compounds or attempted to flee through the city. The scale of the casualties has been debated by historians, as contemporary chroniclers often used dramatic language and did not always provide reliable numbers. What is clear is that the capture of Jerusalem involved significant loss of life among the population and the defending forces. After the fighting subsided, the Crusaders moved quickly to establish control over the city. Religious ceremonies followed, reflecting the Crusaders' belief that their long journey had reached its spiritual destination. Chroniclers described processions and prayers at sites considered sacred within Christian tradition. Yet the political future of Jerusalem remained uncertain. Several Crusader leaders debated who should govern the newly captured city. Eventually, Godfrey of Bouillon accepted a leadership role, though he avoided adopting the title of king. Instead, he used the designation Advocate of the Holy Sepulchre, emphasizing a connection between political authority and religious guardianship. The conquest of Jerusalem marked the culmination of the First Crusade, but it also marked the beginning of a new political order in the eastern Mediterranean. Crusader states emerged in several regions, including the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the County of Edessa, the Principality of Antioch, and the County of Tripoli. These territories existed within a complex environment shaped by local populations, neighboring Muslim states, and the continuing influence of the Byzantine Empire. Maintaining control required alliances, diplomacy, and constant military readiness. For the Muslim world, the fall of Jerusalem was a profound shock. Although the region had long been divided among different rulers, the presence of foreign Crusader states created new political and religious challenges. Over time, Muslim leaders began organizing efforts to resist and eventually reverse the Crusader presence. The capture of Jerusalem also transformed the crusading movement itself. News of the victory spread throughout Europe, encouraging further expeditions. Over the next 2 centuries, multiple crusades would attempt either to defend or to expand the territories established during the First Crusade. At the same time, the events of 1099 left deep and lasting memories across different communities. Christian chronicles often framed the conquest as the fulfillment of a sacred mission. Muslim historians, writing from their own perspective, recorded the loss of an important city and the suffering of its inhabitants. Jewish sources preserved accounts of hardship and displacement during the changing rule of the region. These parallel narratives shaped how later generations understood the Crusades. Each tradition interpreted the events through its own religious, cultural, and historical lens. In the decades that followed, Jerusalem remained a focal point of conflict and diplomacy. Control of the city would shift several times as regional powers rose and fell. The Crusader kingdom of Jerusalem itself faced internal disputes and external pressures that made its long-term survival uncertain. Yet the significance of the events of July 1099 extended far beyond the city's walls. The First Crusade reshaped political boundaries across the eastern Mediterranean and altered relations between Europe and the Middle East. Trade routes, cultural exchanges, and military strategies all evolved in response to the new realities created by the Crusader states. Centuries later, historians continue to examine the causes and consequences of the crusading movement. The capture of Jerusalem remains one of its most defining moments, a convergence of faith, ambition, fear, and determination within the context of medieval warfare. The city itself endured, continuing to hold deep meaning for millions of people across different traditions. Long after the armies of the First Crusade disappeared into history, Jerusalem remained what it had always been, a place where politics, belief, and memory intersect in ways that shape the course of civilizations.